Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question today that I thought I would kind of answer, and it's a question that gets asked pretty often. It's one I see really often, and people will always ask things like, well, if someone's on TRT and they have the testosterone levels of an 18 or a 20-year-old, their age shouldn't matter so much, right? They should be able to gain muscle at the same rate and recover at the same rate as if they were that age. And while that sounds nice in theory, what a lot of people aren't considering with that, and that's okay because not everyone knows these things, and it's okay to not know something, because if you don't know and you don't ask the question, how are we ever going to learn? And so for some people, they would kind of laugh at that question, but I'm not going to, because obviously if so many people are asking it, then clearly people really need to know. They don't know the answer. And the truth is, testosterone levels are only one factor in recovery and muscle growth, and they're one factor that gets affected with age, but it is not by itself. And what I mean by that is, when we age, there's more than one thing that's going on that causes aging and causes side effects and negative effects in the body of aging. Some of them are hormonal, but there are also even genetic changes over time, mutations that happen over time. And so let's discover the hormonal aspect of it first. Yes, as we get older, our testosterone levels go down. That's an absolute fact that every male out there is going to have to deal with at some point in their life. Your testosterone levels are going to get lower and lower the older you get, starting from your teenage years. It's unavoidable. It's going to be different from person to person, but you can't avoid that reality. And testosterone absolutely affects muscle growth. It affects motivation in the gym. It affects aggression in the gym. It affects focus. It affects mood, energy, everything else, but it also has a direct anabolic effect. So there's two different things going on there. Now, the thing that you need to factor in with the actual anabolic effect, testosterone itself in isolation isn't causing the muscle tissue to grow. What happens is that testosterone binds to the androgen receptors in your muscle cells, and it causes them to produce more IGF-1 inside the muscle cell, right there at the nucleus, that it releases into that particular muscle cell from the androgen receptors being activated by the testosterone. So obviously, if testosterone levels go down, intramuscular IGF-1 is going to go down also, which is going to equal less muscle growth and less recovery in that muscle tissue. However, one of the things we've noted is that there are other hormones that play a role in it, particularly things like human growth hormone. So if your human growth hormone levels go down, and they absolutely go down with age, measurably every few years, your levels should get just slightly lower than they were a few years before. So as we age, we get into our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, and beyond, they're going to be noticeably lower in each of those age categories in the same individual. Well, the amount of HGH that you have also seems to affect how much testosterone actually affects IGF-1 production. So if your growth hormone levels are going down, then the testosterone being at the same level it was when you're 18 is still not going to produce the same amount of intramuscular IGF-1 that you produced at 18, unless you also bring growth hormone levels back up to that point. Well, HGH replacement therapy is a lot more involved, and it's a lot more expensive than testosterone replacement therapy. So in order to get equal muscle growth at the cellular level from those hormones, as you get older, up into your 30s, 40s, and older, you would actually need both of those to replicate that same effect that you would get. And again, the HGH therapy is a lot more involved, and it's harder to get. It's more controversial. Fewer doctors are going to be willing to do it. So that's going to make it more difficult for people to do. And if they want to go take it into their own hands on the black market, legitimate HGH is actually fairly hard to get on the black market, and it's very expensive in comparison to testosterone. So people run into cost-effective issues of that as well. So someone just on TRT, while they're going to get a massive boost in muscle growth, a massive boost in recovery, motivation, everything else, even if they've got it perfect and their doctor has their prescription dialed in perfect, they're still not going to have the muscle growth potential that they had when they were younger, just due to the hormone levels as far as that end of it goes. Now, another factor that people need to consider is that as we age, there are other things going on as well. What's been noted by many people out there, one of the main causes of aging is not just the hormones, those are one factor, but also our DNA transcription and translation. Every time your cells multiply, we have a risk of little minor mutations happening. And what happens is you get older and older and older, you get more and more small mutations in your body, and things start running less efficiently because a lot of the new cells that you're making, because your cells just keep copying themselves and splitting and copying themselves and splitting millions and millions of times in your life. And over time, your original DNA gets damaged a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more through all those millions and millions of copying of it. You lose material, you lose data, you get little minor problems. And so what happens, that starts affecting things like structural integrity of various tissues, like your connective tissue. And it starts affecting things like recovery in your various muscle tissues, nerve tissues, things like that over time. It's a real small, subtle difference over time, but it is there. So even if you get the hormone levels right and someone were to be on the TRT and the HGH levels and all of that, just over time, their body isn't going to work as well as it did 20 years ago. You're just not going to recover quite as quickly. Your cartilage isn't going to heal quite as quickly from the trauma that you give it in the gym. Your connective tissue is going to become inflamed easier. It's going to be slightly weaker. So you can still make it adapt. You can still make connective tissue grow and hypertrophy and make gains in and of itself and get thicker and stronger, but it is not going to be quite as good as that same tendon or piece of connective tissue might have been 20 years ago. Like when you get to be 40 versus say 18 years old or 50, so you've gone 20 or 30 years, that connective tissue, even at the same size, might not be quite as strong. The structural integrity might not be quite as good. Therefore, it's going to be slightly more prone to injury, slightly more prone to irritation. Oftentimes when connective tissue gets irritated, your body will sometimes reduce the strength of your peripheral nervous system, and you won't always get as much muscle fiber recruitment because your body is trying to keep you from ripping that connective tissue. So over time, that weaker connective tissue could equal less force production in the muscle. Well, less force production in the muscle is going to equal less gains over time. And it is going to be the weaker nature and slower healing of things like your connective tissue and tendons, ligaments, joints, all of that. It's going to be slower as you age. And so accordingly, if that stuff takes longer to recover, then you can't train quite as hard. And if you do try to train quite as hard, you're not going to be able to train quite as often as you did when you were younger. And so therefore, if workload drops over time, frequency drops over time, or either one of those things starts going down because of those recovery issues, even if you're putting the exogenous hormones back into the body, you're still going to gain a little less muscle. You're still going to gain less size. And the same thing happens when it comes to even losing body fat. Even if you can maintain the muscle mass using exogenous hormones that you had when younger, your metabolism is still going to go down a little bit, just a fraction of an amount every year with age. And so as you get older, you're going to find that it is more difficult to lose body fat, even with exogenous hormones put into the body, unless you're replacing every hormone in the body. And then you run into a big mess. If all of a sudden a person is having to try to balance all of those hormones to get their metabolism right, just like it was when they're 18, you're basically turning into a walking chemistry experiment at that point. Because a person is probably injecting everything from testosterone to HGH to IGF-1 to mechanogrowth factor. They're taking thyroid hormones. They're trying to regulate everything in their body. And before long, your prescription drug list starts looking like a cardiac patient who's in their 70s, with the list of drugs that you're on and the amounts, just trying to get that metabolism to back where it was when you're 18. So the younger viewers need to understand that when you're looking at older lifters sometimes, that yes, it is harder to do these things. It is more difficult, even with testosterone in your system being brought back to normalized levels of these guys that they had what yours is right now at your younger age. Their metabolism is still slower. Body fat is more difficult to lose. It takes more time to lose the same amount of fat generally. It takes more time to gain the same amount of muscle for an older lifter. So it isn't the same ease that it is when you're younger. And yes, testosterone replacement is an absolute miracle. As someone who uses it, I can tell you it is absolutely amazing. But does it completely replicate every aspect of your training and muscle growth and fat loss and healing and regeneration that you had when you're 18? No, obviously not. It absolutely doesn't. But does it give you the mood and the sex drive and everything else that you had at 18? Yes, it does. And it still gives you a big chunk of what you had when you're younger. It's literally like 80% of the recovery and muscle gains and everything that you had when you were younger. And the reason you see a lot of older guys who are on TRT who seem to be making really, really good gains. And some of the younger guys get confused by that. It's not just the TRT, because the TRT is still only giving them a pretty large percentage, but only a percentage of what you guys are able to do in terms of those factors. What you see with older guys is that a lot of older guys are just more careful with what they do. They're wiser. They pay more attention to recovery. They train smarter instead of harder, and accordingly over time they just seem to get really good gains oftentimes because they've learned to be patient. They've learned to put in many years in the gym. They use the TRT to their advantage, and it allows them to seem like they're making better gains than younger guys, because they're paying attention to their body more. Again, they're training smarter instead of harder, and that becomes a really big factor, and it's something that a lot of younger guys don't always do, and you learn over time. As you get older, you learn to do better risk analysis with your life. You learn how much resources you need to allocate to something. You try to find better ways to do things instead of having to just try to work harder all the time. You try to be more intelligent in your approach to everything that you do in life. That's just part of being more mature and part of aging, that you just learn to do that. And most older guys apply that same concept to the gym, just like they do with every other aspect of their life. And so if they are on TRT and they're applying those aspects, older guys still tend to get really good gains. But it's not because they're functioning completely at the level that an 18-year-old is on all of these different aspects of recovery and muscle growth and everything, because older guys simply are not functioning at that level biologically, even with some TRT thrown in. So hopefully that clarifies some of that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.